Shirley here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and I have the chart of the CSTO, which is the sort of a Russian NATO military alliance, and this is an organization that was founded at the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1992, 15 May. I don't have the time, so I don't have Ascendant and Midheaven or the lots, but I do have the chart itself. And so, right from the get-go, this chart looks very much like something that they just had to do and find the lesser evil of an astrological election. The moon could be in either Scorpio or Libra. And what are the things that I see immediately? Mars is 7 degrees Aries at its home sign, not aspecting anything. However, it is a strong Mars at its home sign, which probably was the reason for the election. It's like, hey, we got a good Mars, it's a military organization, let's do the best with that. This Mars is also ruling over Pluto at 21 degrees Scorpio, retrograde. Now, I don't get none of the 22s here, I do get a strong 18 degree. There is Uranus conjoining Neptune in Capricorn. Neptune is 18 degrees, and Saturn that's ruling over those is in its home sign in Aquarius with Lilith, but Saturn is in 18 degrees Aquarius. So double time the 18. And indeed, if I take a look at when was this military, when was part of that alliance activated, which is Russia, then one of the complaints was, whether it's true or not, that Russia was using chemical weapon and biological weapon, which coincides with the 18th degree. And this chart has the explanation for that. It's not a strong 22 chart. 22 degree is good for the to kill or be killed. And one would argue that NATO as well. However, we do have Mars on both of them and its home sign. And so the 18th degree is basically bringing us the weapon, okay? Which means that there can be use of, from medical warfare to toxins, biological weapon, chemical weapon. Again, I'm not saying that there are, I'm just saying that the potential is there astrologically. So, strong Saturn at its home sign, which means that when this organization is activated, it's probably going to be prolonged. And unfortunately, we saw that when Russia went to war, which is a part of the CSTO, this was an ongoing war. If you take a look at the war in Ukraine, it is unfortunately quite long. And the Saturn and at its home sign can give that. Neptune Uranus can denote again developing of radiation-based weapon, toxins-based weapon. So it's kind of like, this is what they had for this election, and those are their cards. Those are the potential cards that they could have. Direct Mars, so we're talking about an initiatory conflict rather than a responsive. Okay, retrograde Mars is a responsive. Direct Mars is initiatory. That being said, I think Mars in NATO is also direct. So Rahu Ketu axis is Cancer and Capricorn, 2 degrees Cancer, Ketu, and Rahu in Capricorn, again ruled by this 18 degrees Saturn. This tells us that the Aries axis was squaring the natal eclipse axis. Now we're heading from the square to the sextile. So in terms of fated events, Yes, I think Ukraine war already started in another sextile that we had, which was when Rao was in Taurus. Which brings me to the next part. Sol conjoining Algol, 24 degrees Taurus, Venus 16 degrees Taurus, Mercury 6 degrees Taurus. Mercury 6 degrees Taurus can tell us that negotiation, peace talks, and anything contracts related can be a prolonged and tedious process because Taurus is a fixed earth sign. So this tells me that whenever this organization is activated, it's difficult to get to agreements, or the negotiations are very detailed, very prolonged. They can be very diplomatic, by the way, because it is a Venus sign. However, this is not a quick Mercury, which tells me that if there is an active battle, it's not such a quick transmission of information, because again, we're talking about a very slow and steady type of Mercury. For the solar goal, it's very natural. We see that the beta per se is very active when we have wars, because that's to do with resources, and beta per se concentrates resources. It concentrates a lot of rituals that are not pretty outdated world rituals, yes, but unfortunately this is also the truth, that this is a lot of rituals that are to do with resources, with currency, and the many things that war is either the guise of, okay, with the change of currency, or that the war is about, okay. And solar gold can be that there is a certain either funding of gold, or that the resource is gold, or that there's something with the gold standard when that alliance gets into action. Again, it's a potential, it doesn't mean that it happens. Jupiter 4 degrees Virgo, again Mercury ruling over that Jupiter Virgo. What I like about Jupiter Virgo is that it's very accommodating. It's a very practical Jupiter. It's not the type of religious war, so that actually gives place for negotiation. It's kind of like, hey, they need the resources, they have practical aims, and they are chasing those, okay, practical aims. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are pragmatic in terms of desiring peace, but rather that their resources needs are not easily masqueraded by, or the ideology or the philosophy is adaptive to whatever the goals are. So that makes quite some sense. Overall, the houses are missing, so I don't know what would be the 12th house, what would be the 8th house, or the places that are kind of a sensitive point around this chart. If I take a look at where Uranus is, so Uranus is going from the trine, where it was in Taurus, to the inconjunct, which tells me that the CSTO, and it's not surprising that as Uranus ingressed into Gemini, the sign of civil wars, where the best human rights win the land, this is kind of challenging to an oligarchy wealth-based structure that is very blunt. I know that the old oligarchy is also under not just scrutiny, it's like life risk and so on, but the Urano Capricorn is a different energy. It's a different energy. It's definitely transforming the patriarchal structure and the orthodoxy structure. That's the Uranus Capricorn. But when it comes to like civil war, labor rights, human rights, suffragists, I don't know how does it, like, it's kind of like water and oil. Um, so this is something that is going to be quite challenging for the CSTO, where NATO swims in that like a fish in the water, because NATO was all around those civil wars and the acquisition of land, reinstating, and by the let's just say the fiscal excuse, which was leveraged, because if they were supporting, you know, the civil wars and supporting the struggles that ended up with suffragists, that ended up with a lot of human rights that weren't there before, then whatever we have to say on NATO swims like a fish in the sea in that energy of Uranus Gemini, whereas the CSTO is receiving a Uranus, receiving a revolutionary vibe from a direction which is like water and oil. It doesn't know how to accommodate for that, and it's going to be a very challenging transition for this organization. When it comes to Neptune, Saturn in Aries, it's very much activating the CSTO, which means that they're gonna need to be sparked into action if they are going to do something. And this is a chart that is kind of the lesser evil of an election. Like, this is definitely a chart that would need a new reinstatement, a renaming, a better election, especially now with the bisextile. The bisextile with Saturn, Neptune, I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to have a new organization that is instead of the CSTO, or renaming, which is, I guess, what we do as astrologers when we want to correct something. And with Mars entering to Scorpio, yes, and around November, it's going to be a problem, because Mars will ingress Scorpio into a square with Pluto. And that is going to be a dramatic challenge to declare a new military alliance. So that is kind of my concern around that as an astrologer when I look at this chart. It is kind of like, that's the chart they had, and they went with that. It definitely was the best election around that time. But this is kind of like, this is what it was. It's not the thinking and cooperation that we have behind NATO. And yes, good thing, bad thing, who knows, but it's going to be quite challenging with the Saturn Neptune to deal with that. Okay, and when it comes to Pluto, so Pluto will be going over Saturn and Lilith in the coming decade. In the coming decade and a half. But it's already activating the co-presence of Pluto and Saturn, which is beyond challenging. And this can be a time of fiscal austerity, and we already see there are sanctions on Russia, and thought to have more sanctions, which can be, I'm not saying devastating, but definitely a sort of an austerity which befalls also this organization. So what are the choices now when Mars is already with Ketu? And the choices are as follows: to have a Mars in Libra, where Mars is going to be trining Pluto, separating from the opposition to Saturn and Neptune, which is challenging for anything Russia or China, and renaming something when Mars is trining Pluto, and in conjuncting Uranus. No, trining Uranus. Sorry, trining Pluto and trining Uranus. That can be a possibility. It would create a kite shape with the Saturn Neptune, and that is probably a good election around that time is probably the go-to option when we want Saturn far enough from Ketu and still given a timestamp of the Saturn Neptune. Again, they very likely know that, and they're very likely going to do something like that. The other option they have is to wait for Mars to be in its home sign. However, then Mars will square Pluto, which is not something that not a good timestamp. Okay, we want Saturn in harmonious aspect to Pluto. Okay, people are sleeping. We want Saturn in harmonious aspect to Pluto, or no, like either we don't want it aspect into Pluto, or we want it in harmonious aspect to Pluto. And the harmonious aspect to both Pluto and Uranus can assist in surprise attacks or in adaptability, that Uranus is in Gemini now, and it can give us an access to Urano-Gemini timeline, but it would require everybody in the alliance to be way more equitable, kind of like NATO. Okay, NATO had to reform its structure to have more sovereignty to the European countries, which comes from the funding. Okay, because they are meant to take on a lead in financing NATO, then they get the fiscal say, and as unfortunate as it is, they would also have more say. Why unfortunate? Because we would like to think about sovereignty and representation in other ways, and yet it's also true that when it comes to funding, they will have more say when they are funding NATO. And so when it comes to the CSTO, a renaming or a chart that will give the countries in Russia an access to the timeline of Urano-Gemini, but this would require appeasing the Urano-Gemini. This would require abolishing slavery. This would require labor rights. This would require suffragist movement. This would require more tolerance towards LGBTQ than we see. This will require something that supports that not only in the military alliance but also in the country's civil wars. It's a completely transforming of anything that that we saw Russia doing before, because this time it's not about communism. It's about something that is way more equitable and sovereign. Okay, the ability to have private property and have it sovereignly and equity between private properties. Okay, so equity of opportunities and equity of the ability to compete and equity of the ability to have an own estate. Mars is a real estate sign. Equity of representation in front of legislative. Okay, if Mars indeed is going to be in Libra, this is something that's completely different than what we saw Russia doing so far. I'm not saying that they can't do it. Actually, if they do it, the West will have a problem. The West will have a problem. Particularly, you know, with death and concentration camps in United States, 2025, with unexpected floods in Texas in Yulee and JFK Airport, but in New York City in general. But with those things, it's kind of like, hey, if China invaded the United States, nobody's gonna know. Nobody's gonna know, okay? And so it's giving America that is losing its Western advantage of sovereignty and individuality in the face of the East. And it's like, hey, if those things, it's like China can do it better. Look at them, they created a sun outside. They created an artificial sun outside. Like this is China is currently the land of the rising sun is literally melting, um, which is beyond not funny. So so I wouldn't be surprised if Russia would go to Uranus timeline and decide, of like, okay, we can do United States good enough, and and so as a half Dutch, then the good enough, do something good enough is actually a value that Europeans share. So that would completely be an unexpected turn of events. That would set everybody into a weird trajectory. Do I see that happening? To be very honest, no. But from an astrology point of view, is that a good idea? That would knock down the entire world. Like people will have to compete on the basis of the values that Uranus Gemini represents, which can actually save the West. I mean, that's the job of the Cold War, to save the West. It's like, so yeah. So this was the refreshing chart. And yes, and Albania decided to ditch the CSTO for NATO. Again, I don't know, I'm not going to go into the chart, in a bunker in Albania. The unreleased track in a bunker in Albania. Yeah, then I would be very surprised if... I don't have its natal chart in front of me, so it would have to accommodate for the Uranus Gemini. Which means, I don't know, would you have like equitable bunkers for every employee or something? I don't know how they're going to do that. But this is, yes. I think I said enough. So that is the CSTO. And if you wondered whether there is a Russian equivalent to NATO, this came the closest. I predict that they will try to do something. That Mars separating from the opposition, opposing Saturn, Neptune in a Chi-ship with Pluto and Uranus, even though Saturn is in Libra, is a pretty good election. And I wouldn't be surprised if you will hear of something like that. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if North Korea would be in it, which is beyond challenging. Okay, it is beyond challenging to think about, but that's the wonderful thing about those interesting times, is that we are all called to reevaluate everything that we thought about diplomacy and international relations. The axis of Pisces and Virgo, the eclipse axis, is triggering the 2030 Gemini-Sag axis, which is, again, a growth crisis. It challenges everything we know, everything that was planned by everybody, whether you're pro 2030 agenda, against 2030 agenda. Everybody has to rethink the reset and to reset the reset. From all of the divergent, from all of the divergent interests and yes, and even fiscally, eclipses are challenging. This is fated new information that people just have to adapt to. And this one changes things from the core because although Saturn is less involved this time, it is involved with Neptune and Aries, but this is indeed a Pisces Rahu, which means the whole world is changing. And Pisces is associated with Neptune. This is my prediction that this Pisces eclipse cycle is going to bring a brand new view on wealth, mafia, medicine, medical welfare, Neptune-like structures, so maritime law during war, the floods, floods in Texas, in the summer. Okay, so so that is that is, I don't think that is related. I mean, Saturn Neptune is related to China, of course, but this is definitely a Neptune that might still coincide with Pisces. I know that this is a controversial saying astrologically, but I do think that we were going to have, and to be very honest, it's going to be challenging to test that hypothesis because of the Saturn Neptune conjunction, which is anyway omnipotent in its destruction, and it's going to be challenging to test my prediction in this cycle, because we're not going to have a lot of time differentiating the effects of Saturn Neptune and Rahu in Pisces. So yeah, that's the CSTO.